Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Cultural Arts Center. I'm Luciana Spraker. I'm director of the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives, and I'm joined by Dr. Otis Johnson, the former mayor of Savannah. I think I can speak on behalf of Mayor Johnson in saying that we are both looking forward to sharing with you about a special project that we've been working on together since March, and that is the exhibit that I think most of you just got a chance to see in the adjacent gallery. 5 years that changed Savannah forever, reflecting on the civil rights movement through the W.W. Law photograph collection. With the opening of this exhibit, we wanted to take some time to talk about Wesley Wallace Law, better known as W.W. Law, this important time period in Savannah's history, and discuss some of the images that are featured in the exhibit. Before we dive in, I want to formally introduce Mayor Johnson, who served as guest curator on the exhibit, a man who probably doesn't need an introduction in Savannah anymore, but definitely deserves one. Dr. Otis Johnson is a native of Savannah, born in the historic Georgia Infirmary Hospital. He graduated Alfred E. Beach High School in 1960 and served on active duty in the U.S. Navy Reserve for 2 years before returning to attend Savannah State College. In 1963, he transferred from Savannah State to Armstrong State College to become the first African American to attend and then graduate from Armstrong in 1964. He went on to the University of Georgia, where he was the first African American from Savannah to earn a bachelor's degree from UGA in 1967. He completed his education with a Master of Social Work from Atlanta University and a PhD degree in Social Welfare from Brandeis University. In a career spanning over 50 years, he has devoted himself to being a servant leader, including work for the Economic Opportunity Authority, the City of Savannah's Model Cities program, teaching at Savannah State University, where he organized the undergraduate degree program in social work, and later served as Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and as Executive Director of the Youth Futures Authority. He served as an alderman on the Savannah City Council in the 1980s, founded the Neighborhood Improvement Association, and served on the Savannah-Chatham County Board of Public Education. In 2003, he was elected the 64th mayor of Savannah and was re-elected to a second term in 2007. After finishing his run as mayor in 2011, he was appointed scholar in residence and professor emeritus at Savannah State University. His autobiography, From N-Word to Mayor, Experiencing the American Dream, was published in 2016. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Johnson this evening. So again, he deserves an introduction. So let's start off with how we got together on this project. If you don't know, the City of Savannah received the W.W. Law Collection 2014 through a donation from the W.W. Law Foundation. I want to recognize our former Alderman, Clifton Jones, for his work with the foundation. Thank you. The collection is over 2,000 cubic feet. It includes Mr. Law's personal materials, including papers, books, music, photographs, artwork, and much more. I've long wanted to showcase his photograph collection. It includes almost 4,000 images, documenting many aspects of Savannah's history. I also thought it was important to do an exhibit focusing on Mr. Law's civil rights work. As president of the Savannah Branch of the NAACP from 1950 until 1976, he was on the front line of the civil rights movement in Savannah. Just this year, we finished processing this vast photograph collection. I'd like to give a shout out to Lacey Brooks. I'm not sure if she's here. She was the project archivist on the photograph collection, and it was a monumental task to process that many photographs. With that project closing, it seemed the right time to do this exhibit. But I wasn't the right person to curate this exhibit. I'm not from Savannah, I'm not an African American, and I was not alive in the 1960s. Right. So it was important to have a native Savannian who was involved in these events as they were unfolding, to have a voice in the creation of this exhibit. So I asked Mayor Johnson if he would guest curate and select the images and write an introduction. So, what did you think when I asked you? Why did you say yes?
I said yes because it was a tremendous opportunity to lift up W.W. Law and the work that he had done, and to expose some of the thousands of artifacts that comprise the W.W. Law collection. And I want to give a shout out to Mr. Jones and the late Rima Pendergrass, because without their work, we don't know what would have happened to the exhibit. And I also want to just thank the city of Savannah for taking it on, because I feel like so much of it would have been destroyed, stolen, or lost had it not come to the city of Savannah.
Okay. So after working on the W.W. Law collection since 2014, I feel like I know Mr. Law quite intimately. But in fact, I only met him once as a preservation student. And the Mr. Law who came and spoke to my class was the community elder, scholar, and historian that you see pictured in the lower right here. And that man was revered for his lifetime of experience and knowledge. As Mayor Johnson and I recently discussed, the large body of work, several community institutions, including Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum, King Tisdale Cottage, Beach Institute, numerous proteges, and the vast archival collection he left behind attest to, Mr. Law was quite the Renaissance man, mentor, and leader. I selected this assortment of images from his photograph collection because they represent the young man who became this elder on the right. In the upper left, he's featured as a Boy Scout leader with his own mentors, John S. Delaware and the Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert. W.W. Law was a powerful orator. He was always seen walking about Savannah with reading material under his arm, like you see here. More often than not, he had reading material for you as well. His NAACP desk and his home were cluttered with work, and there was little separation between his personal life and work life because he never stopped working. But he did have a full-time job also as a mail carrier for the U.S. Postal Service for over 40 years. So I want you to tell them when you first met Mr. Law, how your lives began to intersect as you were a young man, and how he influenced you to become the leader you are now.
Mr. Law was very active in the Boy Scouts when I was growing up. And I was a member of Troop 271, which was sponsored by the Bethel AME Church, which was located on East Broad and Greenwich Lane. And we used to have these jamborees. We had about 5 or 6 African-American troops from various churches, and we would meet at the, I think it was called the 4S's over on Geechee Road, where 37th runs into. So we would go over there, and we would engage in various contests, knot tying, making fire with flint, applying first aid, all kinds of different skills that we were learning in the Boy Scouts. And as you see in that picture, Mr. Law was involved with the troop over at, I think that was First African Baptist Church, or either First Bryan, I can't remember which one it was, but one or the other. And you can see him up there, and he would be one of the adults who would judge our skills. That's how I met him when I was in the Boy Scouts. Then when the Civil Rights Movement started, I was in the 12th grade, and Carolyn Quillen and Joan Tyson were in my homeroom class when they got arrested at the Levy's Azalea Room. And we started being active in that period. And then I went away to the Navy for a couple of years, and I came back in 1962 when things were really heating up with the direct action phase. Pretty much it was Jose Williams' show by that time in terms of the direct action, because the NAACP took a more moderate approach to the demonstrations. And of course, by that time, the Reverend L. Scott Stell, along with about 19 or 20 other African Americans, filed a suit which became known as the Stell versus the Board of Education suit. But the hot action was the demonstrations led by Jose Williams after a break in the NAACP. In 1960, there was the Crusade for Voters, which was a subsidiary of the NAACP here. But if you know Jose, you know he was a hothead, and he and Mr. Law clashed over strategies. And so Jose pulled out and affiliated with SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And they began to have more active demonstrations while we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. But anyway, I'll stop there because okay. I'm going on. I'm trying to give you a whole history in one statement.
Okay. Well, let's dive in then. So, WW Law's own entrance into NAACP leadership was through the NAACP Youth Council. Right. He was first president of the Youth Council before moving on to be president of the Savannah Branch. Right. And this picture you selected, he's installing officers into the West Side NAACP Youth Council. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of the NAACP Youth Council and youth in general during this period.
Yeah, the youth in Savannah wanted to follow what went on in Greensboro. Once the sit-in movement started with the arrests of the people in Greensboro, the young people in Savannah were very anxious to make their statement. And if you go back into the editorials of the Savannah Morning News and Evening Press, and one time we had an evening paper and a morning paper, and you can look at the editorials that were encouraging our colored citizens not to act like those people in North Carolina, that we had good relations here, and that we should not stir up anything. Well, you know, that's like, you know what that's like. So the NAACP that sponsors the youth arm began to prepare young people for direct action. And as I said before, Carolyn Quillen and Joan Tyson were in my homeroom class, and we caught the fever. And on March the 16th, 1960, my senior year, is when the sit-in movement started in Savannah. But I titled this The Vanguard because young people all over the world are the ones that will challenge authority. You see what's happening in Hong Kong right now? All over the world, Tiananmen Square, wherever you see uprisings against an oppressive order, you will find young people in the vanguard. And so the NAACP Youth Council became the vanguard of the movement here. And it's interesting that when you're young, 17 and 18, some were 15 and 16, you don't have any fear. The older you get, the more afraid you become. Because the older you get, you understand the dangers that are out there that can come upon you. But when you're young, you're just fearless. And so these young people became the vanguard of the movement in Savannah. The elderly people, or the older people, had their role to play because they put up the bond money to get the students out of jail. So they weren't going to demonstrate because they had jobs to lose, businesses that would have been ostracized. They had a lot of stuff that these young people didn't think about or were afraid of the consequences of what they did. So this is the beginning of the exhibit, with them stepping forward on March the 16th to start the sit-ins in Savannah. And that date was consciously selected. And I know all of you know what March the 17th is in Savannah. What is March the 17th? St. Patrick's Day. So what better time to stir up something than the day before St. Patrick's Day? And that's what happened. They were arrested when they were asked to leave, and they refused. They said they had a right to be served, and that kicked it off in the city of Savannah, March the 16th, 1960. But you have to go way back, because Savannah has always had a militant black community. At the turn of the century, the citizens in Savannah were boycotting the streetcars when Jim Crow became the law of the land, and they said that black folk couldn't ride anywhere on the streetcars. And so long before the '55 Montgomery boycott, blacks were boycotting at the turn of the century in the city of Savannah, protesting segregation on public transportation. And I could go on back to Reconstruction, but I won't do that today.
All right. Okay, so you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what's going on in this picture?
Right. Savannah was unique because in the 40s, there was a suit brought in federal court protesting the white primary. I hope y'all know what the white primary was. Because there were very few Republican whites, and at that time, you still had a sizable portion of black Republicans, and there's a long story to that. But there was a suit in federal court, the Primus King case, which challenged the Democratic primary, which was tantamount to an election. And they were excluding blacks from registering to vote, and therefore, if you couldn't register, you couldn't run for office. So the Primus King case broke up the white primary. As a result of that, there was a concerted effort in the public schools, the black public schools, and we were all segregated. We had two high schools, Beach and Woodville, which after Woodville burned down, they renamed it Tompkins. And now it's been renamed again, Woodville Tompkins. But in the day, it was Beach, Alfred E. Beach High School, and Woodville High School. There was a practice that when we turned 17 and a half, we were taken to the courthouse to register to vote. Unlike a lot of other communities, because of the number of voters, black voters that we had, we could elect people that would work with us on certain things. And so we were able to get people in the registrar's office that would not play these idiotic games about how many bubbles in a bar of soap or how many marbles in a jar and all that foolishness. But what they did with us when we went to register, we had to read a portion of the Georgia Constitution and interpret what we had read. Well, we were prepared because those black teachers prepared us, and we could interpret what we read. You know, it wasn't no mystery. I mean, it was just, you read something and you say what you think it means. And they could have played with that because it was all in their hands to agree that you had interpreted correctly, or they could play the games that were played all over the South and said, no, you didn't interpret it right. But we didn't have to go through that. So every year, all of the students that were 17 and a half were rounded up and taken to the courthouse. And that, in addition to the voter registration drives out in the larger community, we had a group of people who could not, because of the Jim Crow laws without districts, we could not elect outrightly people that we wanted to represent us as black people, but we could be the margin of victory for any white candidate in Chatham County. And we played that role through the NAACP Political Action Committee. We had that was long before PACs became, what they are today. But I see some people nodding because y'all lived it. Y'all knew the political power we once wielded in this town. And from time to time, we go back to it. Every now and then we flex our political muscle.
All right. You've already talked about the start of the sit-ins,
right.
But you mentioned to me what happened to you on that first day of the start of the sit-ins.
The only time I had a disciplinary problem in high school is when we went down to the courthouse to the trial of my classmates. And we were just naive because if we had just played hooky and not gone to school that day and gone on to the courthouse, we wouldn't have been suspended from school. But we were stupid enough to go to school and then leave school without permission. And then we went back to school. And Arthur Douglas, y'all know Arthur Douglas, met us at the door and told us we were all suspended until we brought a parent back to get us readmitted. Now, y'all have to know my grandparents, and you're talking about afraid, but I was really afraid to go home and tell my grandparents that I was suspended from school in my senior year. Think about that. And it was all in their hopes and dreams, that we were going to graduate. I mean, this was serious stuff. And to be put out, I had to go and I told them what had happened. They said I should have known better, but I didn't. And plus I was all caught up in the spirit of the thing anyway. So my granddaddy went with me and we all went through the ritual. And we said, I'm sorry that I left school without permission, and I promise that I will never do anything like that again. And then my granddaddy said, Mr. Douglas, I can guarantee that this boy ain't gonna do anything like that again. And that was all that was required. And we were readmitted to school. I graduated in that June, and we rolled on to the next phase in my life. But we just weren't thinking. I could have had one day absent, no trouble. Grandparents would have never known I played hooky. Just didn't think that. And that tells you something, about being young and just not knowing what the dangers are, what the consequences of certain actions are. But I don't regret that. I would do it again, although I would just play hooky.
So this photograph was accompanied by some handwritten notations from Mr. Law. He identified it as a mass meeting at First African Baptist Church, Sunday, May 1st, 1960. He said it was the first meeting following the passage of anti-picket laws, and he noted that the police were outside taking photos. So I want you to tell us about the weekly mass meetings, where they were held, who came out for them, and what happened at those meetings.
Yeah. Once the students started being arrested in April or May, the black community decided that it would engage in a selective buying campaign. And we began to withhold our patronage for all of the businesses downtown, and Broughton Street in the day was the major shopping center for the community. And Levy's had charge cards, and it was, a thing of honor for black folk to have a Levy's charge card, because there weren't many. This is long before everybody had 4 or 5, but Levy's, Adler's, Lerner's, and some of you know the list of stores up and down Broughton Street that were there. And so we said, if we can't work there, if we can't try on garments there, then we're going to withhold our patronage. And every week, the community gathered at a church. The first mass meeting was held at the Bolton Street Baptist Church. And every Sunday it was moved to another place. And that was done for several reasons. Number one, the congregation would come because they would want to represent their church. And then it was a safe place for the community to come and hold these meetings at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And thousands of people over the months would come, and they would hear the news, how many people had got arrested, how was the boycott going, what was the next target. And then you was expected to contribute to the fund to help run these things. And it developed a tremendous sense of pride in the community. And as I said earlier, a lot of these adults were in positions where they could not actively participate, but they could show their support at the Sunday mass meeting. And the idea that the police was out there taking pictures was intimidation, because a lot of people were afraid that if their boss knew that they were involved in any way, that they would be fired. And for those of you who know anything about civil rights history, economic intimidation was a major tool that the white community used against black people who were involved. And Mr. Law is a good example of that. This man who ran for Congress pledged that if he was elected, he would get Law fired. Well, he got elected, and he went to the Postal Service, and they trumped up a charge that said Mr. Law was urinating on his route, and they fired him. Well, everybody knew that that was a trumped up charge, and so the national NAACP and I think Roy Wilkins was the head of the NAACP at that time, went to President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, and appealed this unfair dismissal of Mr. Law. And the Kennedys instructed the Postal Service to reinstate Law. And that's how he continued on his job, because that was his only source of income, and he was supporting his mother and a sister. But that was that's a concrete example of the kind of economic intimidation that was used during the Civil Rights Movement. And you know the history of Fannie Lou Hamer being thrown off the plantation when she got too big for her, you know, whatever. But I mean, it was a common practice. But this was the activity on Sunday afternoon that was a must attend.
Okay, so all three of these images represent different types of demonstrations that were going on in the early 1960s. All represent peaceful demonstrations led by youth protesters. On the far left, we have Mr. Law with Desi Riley, who was a youth, and they're protesting segregation at Grayson Stadium. Then we have youth getting ready at the NAACP office to leave to go out to a wade-in at Tybee. And then on the right, we have youth participating in kneel-ins, trying to gain access to churches in Savannah. So talk about some of these different types of protests and the youth involved in them. And I think you have some other protests that you want to share with us too.
Yeah, a decision was made that everything that was segregated in the city was going to be protested. And what you see here is Mr. Law and that young man at Daffin Park at Grayson Stadium. It was the practice in the day that blacks could come to the baseball games, but they all had to sit in the left field bleachers. I don't know if any of you are old enough to know about that. But during the spring training, teams like the Dodgers and the Giants and the Yankees and other teams would come to Grayson Stadium and give exhibition games. That's where I saw Jackie Robinson and Don Newcomb and Willie Mays, all of those people that were pioneers of breaking up segregation in the major leagues. And so this is a protest that said that we were paying the same admission fee, but we were relegated to the left field bleachers. And my grandfather would take Paul and I, my brother and I, to these games because seeing Jackie Robinson, I mean, you know, boy, that was something. Seeing Don Newcomb and Willie Mays, that was really, really something. The one in the center is a wade-in. This group went to Tybee, which was a very dangerous trek because, you know, Tybee is an island and there's only one way in and one way out. And so these are the young people who were brave enough to go down there and wade in the water, and they were arrested. And again, the people of means in the black community put up the bail money to get them out. The one on the right is a kneel-in. The black folks said that, well, churches should not be segregated. And you know that everybody knows that 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in America. And so the churches became a target. Bull Street Baptist, all of the downtown churches. You had people going there, kneeling in, and you had the white ushers meeting them at the door, telling them they were not welcome and they were not going to be admitted. Justin Ford, I don't know if anybody in here remembers Justin Ford, but Justin Ford was arrested for trying to desegregate a white bathroom. And he said that in addition to all of these things, that he engaged in a pissing. So, like I said, if it was segregated, it was being challenged.
So you skipped ahead on me. So we've already talked about selective buying.
Okay.
But so here's our pictures for selective buying. But this is the bargain corner demonstrations and over on West Side Shopping Center. You want to add anything about selective buying?
Yeah, selective buying, again, was a way to use our economic power. Many of the stores would not hire cashiers, would not hire clerks, and they had other discriminatory practices, and they became targeted. And several of them, because they relied so much on black clientele, went out of business. And the others sort of got scared, and they decided after, I think it was 18 months, 19 months, something like that, I don't remember the exact number of months of the boycott, that they would begin to look at hiring clerks, cashiers, other people in those stores. So we exercised our political clout through these boycotts. Green power works.
All right, so here's two photographs relating to education. The one on the left is the NAACP Education Committee and the supporting parents for the Stell versus Board of Education case right before they traveled to the Federal District Court in Brunswick. And then the photograph on the right is the first 19 students who integrated Savannah's public high schools, Savannah High and Groves High, in September 1963. So you've already sort of mentioned the Stell case, so talk a little bit about what the outcome of that case was, what it meant for Savannah, and then the obstacles that these students faced as they integrated the schools.
As I said earlier, the Stell case took the name of Reverend L. Scott Stell, who petitioned on behalf of his sons, and there were a number of other blacks with children in the public school system who were a part of the plaintiffs. That case, and I remember it, that case brought in an expert on behalf of the Savannah Chatham County Board of Education who testified that desegregating the schools would irreparably harm the white students because they would be made to attend school with people who had smaller brains than they did, or larger brains. I don't remember what the crazy thing was, but it was a difference in the brain size. And they brought in all these measurements as an expert witness to prove that desegregating the schools would lead to the harmful impact on white students. But that didn't work, and finally the Court of Appeals demanded that the Chatham County school system be desegregated in 1963. I want to remind you that the Supreme Court outlawed segregated schools in 1954. I was in the 6th grade. I graduated from Beach 6 years later, and there was no even talk on anybody's side other than our side about desegregating the schools. So 3 years later is when 9 years after the court said segregation was illegal, that these young people were handpicked by the NAACP to attend Groves High School and Savannah High School. And they caught hell because when they went to school, they were subjected to all kinds of harassment. And they had been schooled and coached into how that they should deal with this kind of harassment. But human nature says that some people are gonna fight back. You know, you're just not gonna, well, y'all know what I'm talking about. And after a while, the attacks subsided and things settled down because I guess the folks decided that this was inevitable. But what they did, they played games with it. They started with the 12th grade. Now, when you're in 12th grade, you have a tremendous loyalty to your school, and you want to graduate from that school. And these young people were willing to give up their 12th grade year for the cause, and they did. And it was 19 of them. I think 7 went to Groves, and the remainder went to Savannah High. And the next picture shows what we were really, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, but do you want me to change it?
Yeah, I have to follow.
Oh.
I mean, it's hard for me to follow the script. You know.
I don't know, if we might not be on the same script.
What's the next? Oh, oh, oh.
So I want you to tell them how you ended up in this picture.
Okay. In 1963, in the spring, a professor who had been very active with the college NAACP chapter and had the audacity, and I use that word sarcastic, he had the audacity to apply to become the superintendent of the Chatham County Schools. They hadn't even desegregated yet. And he had the nerve to apply, and his name was Christoph. He taught economics on the campus. And we felt that that was a real injustice. So we had what is commonly called a student uprising, where we boycotted classes and demanded that this professor be reinstated. And as a part of that effort, somebody, probably Bobby Hill or James Brown or the two of them together, came up with the idea that freshmen and sophomores should go over to Armstrong and apply to transfer because Armstrong was still segregated. They had denied several other applicants, and so they were maintaining their segregated status. There were more than 50 of us who went over there to pick up applications to apply for a transfer. I didn't know that everybody but me was not going to send their applications in. I sent mine back because, you know, when you say you're going to do something, you try to do it. I sent mine back. I got a notice that they had received the application and that they were processing it. So I made my way over as quickly as I could get there to the NAACP office to say, Mr. Law, I've applied to transfer and they have acknowledged the receipt of my application, and now I know that I'm the only one. So Mr. Law contacted Attorney Eugene Gaston and Attorney Bushbaum. Some of you may know Attorney Bushbaum, and so they sat me down and they said, we got to go through with this because this is an opportunity see, we were desegregating. Like I said, we were desegregating anything and everything we could. So they said, okay, you're a veteran. They can't hold that against you. You've been a freshman at Savannah State and you've got good grades. They can't hold that against you. You're not a criminal. I mean, there was nothing that they could use to stop me legally from coming. So I went through the process. They called me over. They said, they asked me if I wanted to go through with the process. And, you don't disappoint Mr. Law. And I thought that this was something really exciting. So I went through the process and they admitted me. And there I am. 1 year later, receiving my Associate of Arts degree from Armstrong as the first African American. So now what am I going to do? Am I going back to Savannah State and finish up? Or am I going to the University of Georgia where most of these people were going after they finished their junior college years? And of course, you know what I did. I went to the University of Georgia. I went up there for an interview, and the admissions director told me that I shouldn't come because I would have been the first undergraduate from Savannah, and if I failed, it would be a bad mark on the black community in Savannah. And I told him, I said, shit, if you let me in here, I'm gonna get out. And I got out with an AB degree and never looked back. And I have only been back on that campus probably less than 5 times. And in my book, I talk about being a different kind of bulldog. Because there were the bulldogs, and then there were the bulldogs. And in 1964, Athens was not a friendly place. And there were a lot of stories that are in that book about my experience there at the University of Georgia. I pay my money, so I'll have a voice. If you don't pay your money, you don't have a voice. But I don't participate in many things there. I've been to the Continuing Education Center numerous times because that's sort of like an adjunct. But I have some very strong feelings about that experience at the university. But I got out.
Okay, here you are presenting the First in Freedom Awards to Joan Tyson, Ernest Robinson, and Carolyn Quillen.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting close to time, so I want you to quickly tell us why you were selected to present those awards and what the awards represent.
Yeah, because of my role at Armstrong and the University of Georgia, Mr. Law asked me if I would present these awards to the first 3 people who were arrested in the sit-in movement. And so that's why my little skinny butt is up there. But that was a way to showcase what we had achieved in terms of the direct sit-in movement and then desegregating Armstrong. And then there should be a picture of the young people. Well, we've already shown that picture of the young people, the 19 who went to Groves and Savannah High.
So desegregation had some powerful impacts. So I think you selected these pictures to show that. So you want to say what's going on here?
Yeah, I selected these pictures because they speak to the promise of what people were fighting for. Those little kids are saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. They're not afraid of each other. Probably most of them haven't been taught to really hate yet, but that's the possibility. This little white girl has her hand, you see what that hand is? She doesn't even know that she's supposed to put the right hand over her heart. So these folk are malleable, but they're taught. You have to be taught to hate. You don't come into the world hating somebody who doesn't look like you. But this is the possibility, if you can start them young enough and stay out of their way and not poison them with hate, they grow up knowing each other, knowing that they're gonna like some of them and dislike some of them. It's just like your relationships. I don't like everybody who's black, and I don't dislike everybody who's white, because I look at their character. Here is the result of a struggle that started at Johnson High School in 1961. Some of you know the story of Florence Cheatham, who was the principal. And he wanted to have an NROTC program at Johnson High School because there were no ROTC programs for blacks in the 3 schools. They built Johnson to serve the east side. I had to get to Beach the best way I could, and I lived on Rockefeller Street over there where Hubert's middle school is. And so there was a tremendous struggle, and that's where Ben Clark emerged as a leader. Benjamin Van Clark was a student who had tremendous charisma and leadership skills and was very instrumental in the student protest movement around getting an ROTC program at Johnson. It cost Cheatham his job, but he went on to the New England area and became the superintendent of the Cambridge, Massachusetts School District. So you can't keep a good man down. And they tried to hurt his career, but they were unfortunate. They were not successful. So here you see at Savannah High, and if you give us a chance, we're going to excel. Just get out of the way. This is a highly competitive position to be a company leader like that. And so these 2 pictures talk about the promise and the ability to capitalize on opportunities when you remove the barriers. And that's why I selected these 2 pictures.
All right, this is our last selection. So on March 21st, 1965, you participated in a solidarity march in Savannah. And we can see you in the left picture. You're walking in a beret and sunglasses, looking very cool, by the way. So I want you to tell us about that day, what you all were marching for. The march ended on the right in a prayer in front of the Chatham County Courthouse. which, by the way, is one of my favorite pictures in our collection.
Yeah. All of you know what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And when the decision was made to march from Selma to Montgomery, the community, primarily led by ministers, decided that we would have a solidarity march. And this is a picture of that march, which ended up at the courthouse with all of the participants kneeling in prayer and showing our solidarity with the people in Alabama. This is the end of this particular exhibit because I wanted to, and with the encouragement, to narrow this down to the 5 years that fundamentally changed Savannah. And you can see from the beginning in March the 16th, 1960, until this Solidarity March in 1965, things were changing. The business community decided to stop fighting, and they got together under the tutelage and auspices of Mayor Malcolm McLean and one of the Catholic bishops here, and brought the white community together with the black community to talk about how can we get back to civility in this community. And it was interesting because from the time W.W. Law became the president of the NAACP in 1950 until Jose Williams came on the scene in the 60s, Law was the devil. But when Jose got on the scene, then all of a sudden they wanted to talk to Mr. Law because he was reasonable. And that taught me a profound lesson, that you got to have some folk who can sit down at the table and negotiate. But like Frederick Douglass says, where there is no demand, they're not going to give up anything. They never have and they never will. So we needed a Jose and we needed a WW. And both of them played their roles very well. So they sat down with Gene Gaston, and those of you know Gene Gaston, and Curtis Cooper, and Mercedes Wright, and some other people, and they drew up this agreement that they would begin desegregating the downtown, they would desegregate the theaters, and all of the other public accommodations. And Malcolm McLean and Don Mendonza and the city manager, Blackburn, negotiated, and they did not let the police get out of control. They were in control of the city government, and they held the police in control. And so in the 63, we had marches twice a day. At lunchtime, and they would go down in front of the federal, what is now the federal building down there where they got that big old thing about Tomachichi, and down on Johnson Square. And then at night, they would start from the, what's the place that used to be on, the Flamingo. I see some heads shaking. Y'all know I'm telling the truth. They would start at the Flamingo, and they'd have a nice big rally, get everybody all psyched up, and then they would strike up and go out on Gwinnett Street and go down West Broad Street to Broughton Street and go down Broughton and come on around and eventually come back to the Flamingo and have some more fun. But that 63 was the turning point. And then in 64, when King came, he made a statement that I don't agree with, that Savannah was the most desegregated city in the South. He just didn't know. He didn't stay long enough to know. But it was probably more desegregated than most cities because of the work that the NAACP and SCLC had done to force this community to come to terms with the fact that they were mistreating a large segment of their population. And fortunately, many people in this room participated in that. I am very thankful that I was a part of it. And when I got the opportunity to lift up this part of the story, I jumped on it, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. So we've actually maxed out our time, but we do have some time in the gallery still. So we showed you a nice little sample, but there are more images in the exhibit, and Dr. Johnson's going to stay with us until 7:30. So I'd encourage you to come up and talk to him if you have questions. Go to the gallery. We do have some unidentified people in the images. There are some bookmarks with contact information that's in the gallery. So if you know people in the pictures, let us know. Okay, that would be great.
Please do.
And yeah, whoever's got information, talk to me.
Yeah.
Okay, and I am so thankful for all of you coming out tonight.
Yeah, if you
Use your mic.
really want to delve into this more, if you want to delve into this more, go to the Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum. If you really want a deeper involvement in what happened in Savannah, go to the Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum. This is one of the things that Mr. Law organized to really pay tribute to his mentor, who was the Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert. He had a tremendous influence on Mr. Law, and Ralph Mark Gilbert was really an important figure, not only in Savannah's history, but in the history of Georgia, because he went all over the state.
Right there.
Yes, he went all over the state organizing NAACP chapters. And that was dangerous work on the back roads of Georgia in the 40s.
Thank you so much, everybody.